Okay, good afternoon and welcome to our New York Archives Magazine online speaker series. I'm Josie Madison, editor of New York Archives. Today, we're joined by speakers John Callaghan and Jean Mackay, who will share the rich history of the Erie Canal, which shaped New York's growth and development over the past 2 centuries. The session will be led by retired New York State Archivist Tom Ruller, and will delve into the transformative power of the Erie Canal and how this engineering marvel continues to inspire and innovate projects today. John Callaghan has served as executive director of the Hudson River Black River Regulating District since April 2019. Prior to joining HRBRRD, Mr. Callaghan had been employed by the New York State Canal Corporation, where he held various positions over 2 decades, including tug captain, canal traffic agent, special assistant, director of policy implementation and planning, deputy director, acting executive deputy director, and acting director. Jean Mackay has served as the Director of Communications and Outreach for the Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor since 2007. She works collaboratively with federal, state, and local agencies and organizations throughout the 500-mile-long National Heritage Corridor to preserve canal heritage, promote tourism, and foster vibrant communities along the waterway. Jean is responsible for developing and implementing communications, marketing, and special programs. Tom Ruller retired from his position as New York State Archivist in 2023. An active professional for 35 years, Tom is the author of several peer-reviewed journal articles and reviews on the use of technology in archives and the preservation of records in electronic form. Tom has been a consultant for several state governments and other organizations focusing on electronic records management and preservation. He remains actively engaged as a board member and steward of the Archives Partnership Trust. So welcome to everyone who has joined us today. There will be a question and answer session at the end of this presentation. So as questions come to you, please feel free to submit those using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, not the chat, but the Q&A. And at the end, we'll leave a few minutes to get to as many of those as we can. And now I'm pleased to introduce Tom Ruller, John Callaghan, and Jean Mackay.
Josie, thank you. John, Jean, it's great to see you both. I know I have been eagerly anticipating this program, and I know that our audience definitely has been eagerly anticipating it. What a great way here in January to kick off the bicentennial year of the completion of New York's gift to the nation. New York, the Erie Canal, and I think the Champlain Canal were transformative in terms of what happened here in New York, but they were equally transformative in terms of what happened to the rest of the country. And what's wonderful about the Erie and the Champlain and the other canals is you can still see them and use them today, 200 years later. So I'm really excited to learn a little bit more about the history and the formation of the canal. And John, we're really excited to hear that, and about what's happening with the canal today and what does the future hold for all of us. As New Yorkers, it's a gift, and it's a gift that we all have an opportunity to take advantage of. And we're really grateful to both of you for helping us appreciate this gift that much more. So John, I know you've got a PowerPoint, and I think you do too, Jean. So I'm going to talk as little as possible and let you folks drive the bus.
Thanks, Tom.
Well, thanks so much, Tom, as well. And I am going to begin, I hope, sharing my screen here. And maybe I've already started doing it.
You have. You're up and running.
Okay. I'm up and running. I just need to get to the correct slide. So bear with me for 1 second. Okay, how's that? They had the same problem getting the slide deck out in 1808, I think, right after Joshua Foreman's resolution. But pleased to be with you all. I appreciate the opportunity. And who made the Erie Canal? Tom talks about New York's gift to the nation. So who gets the credit for that gift? And I think that's a good place to start because it's a more interesting story than a lot of people realize. And when I can see people to whom I'm speaking, I usually start by saying, raise your hand if you know that DeWitt Clinton came up with the idea for the Erie Canal, and a lot of hands go up. So we we start from there. But it really is a good old-fashioned whodunit. Success has 1,000 fathers. There were lots of people that after the canal became the unparalleled success that it became, later claimed credit for the idea. You would too, if you had a claim that was at least plausible. But really, the truth is, it was a very iterative process to get to the point where New York said, okay, let's build a canal through 363 miles of wilderness and connect the Great Lakes with the Atlantic. And it started very early on in 1700. The colonial governor of New York begins talking about improvements. In 1724, Cadwallader Colden, who was a surveyor general in New York State, extols the benefits of increased improvements. Christopher Coles in 1784. In 1792, all of these proposals and thoughts about how to improve inland navigation in New York State culminate in the creation of the Western Inland Lock Navigation Company. General Philip Schuyler of Revolutionary War fame is the head of that, and they do quite a bit. They build New York's first canal and several locks that basically take out portages primarily along the Mohawk River, connecting the central part of the state with really Schenectady. A number of improvements that we look at today as rudimentary, but at the time they were transformative. And those improvements are completed in 1803. And there things stay until a flour merchant named Jesse Hawley, who was a customer of the Western Inland Lock Navigation Company and who was acquainted with how poorly it was run and how much better we could do, puts thoughts down on paper that really form the genesis of what would be New York's canal policy and the drive ultimately to build the Erie Canal. He publishes the first of 14 essays in the Commonwealth out of Pennsylvania, and the remainder of his essays, published between 1807 and 1808, are published in the Genesee Messenger, and that published there because it happened to be close to where he was imprisoned. Jesse Hawley had done so poorly in business that he was sent to debtor's prison, and he knew that the improvements that New York could make with an Erie Canal could have avoided that and certainly bring wealth and prosperity to other businesses along New York State. Along the same time, you have a lot of federal interest in the construction of canals and waterways throughout the country. This is in no small part to President Jefferson's second inaugural in 1805. He extols the benefits of federal investment in roads and waterways. This leads to ultimately a report by the Secretary of the Treasury in 1808. And then Joshua Foreman, who is one of the many people who would line up around the block to later claim credit for the Erie Canal. In 1808, he does do something very important. He introduces in the legislature the first legislative action that would really ultimately lead to the canal's construction, and that is to authorize a survey and report. Joshua Foreman is also notable for folks who remember that Thomas Jefferson described the idea of the Erie Canal as a little short of madness. It was Joshua Foreman to whom he said that. But the 1809 report from State Surveyor James Geddes was very important because it examined not only primarily the route that they were interested in between the Hudson River and Lake Ontario, but also he had continued west and saw the geographic formations that would later make the canal possible. So that brings us to 1810, when a little known but very, very important all-nighter occurs in Albany, the state capital, where people have been known to get together to debate the important issues late into the evening, sometimes all evening, and sometimes those debates make their way into state policy. And I can tell you that this was probably the most significant all-nighter in New York State history. because it led to what I like to refer to as the let's get Mikey moment. If you're familiar with the Life cereal commercial, except in this case, it was let's get DeWitt. So Jonas Platt and Thomas Eddy get together. Jonas Platt is a state senator. He is in the minority, but Thomas Eddy feels he's got a kindred spirit in Jonas Platt. Thomas Eddy is with the Western Inland Lock Navigation Company, and he is looking for a little more money. They would perhaps like to connect Oneida Lake with Lake Ontario, perhaps the Finger Lakes. And so again, Thomas Eddy is coming to this conversation along the lines of the more iterative process. We're going to build more connections. We're going to connect. We're going to eliminate some of these portages. And so he calls on Jonas Platt, and they get to talking. And Jonas Platt eventually says, you know, what about all this stuff? You know, he has read Jesse Hawley's essays. So many of New Yorkers in prominent positions have by this time. He's heard Jefferson's message. Why are we piecemealing this thing? Let's get back to the idea of constructing a canal to connect the Hudson River and the Great Lakes. And but I'm just in the minority. You know, who can we get on our side that will really embrace this effort? Who's got credibility, who's in the majority, and lo and behold, they settle on none other than DeWitt Clinton, who they go to see the following morning. And DeWitt Clinton, from that moment on, does become the canal's chief political proponent, chief advocate, very, very important. And we don't do anything to discount his contribution. But DeWitt Clinton, you can see here, offers the, pardon me, as I'm trying to read my notes as I look also at the pictures on the screen. When the Senate formed, Mr. Platt offered the resolution. The resolution appointed the original canal commissioners, including the incomparable Gouverneur Morris, and they are going to conduct a trip across the state to determine what route would be feasible for the Erie Canal, which they do in 1810. Now, Tom has referenced briefly, and I'm sure will again, the vast array of records, fortunately, that are in the care of the New York State Archives. We are also very fortunate to have DeWitt Clinton's TripAdvisor and Reddit review of a spot that he stayed. I can't move my video box. Oh, yes, I can, to read this. But the Commodore, this is DeWitt Clinton during that trip. The Commodore and I, speaking of Gouverneur Morris, took possession of the beds below. But previous to this, we were assured by an apparently decent girl that they were free from vermin and that the beds above were well stored with them. No sooner were we lodged than our noses were assailed by 1,000 villainous smells, meeting our olfactory nerves in all directions, the most potent exhalation arising from boiled pork, which was left close to our heads. Our ears were invaded by a commingled noise of drunken people in an adjacent room, of crickets in the hearth, of rats in the walls, of dogs were the beds, by the whizzing of mosquitoes about our heads and the flying of bats about the room. He continues, of course, you can see at the bottom, with more marketing material. And of course, that was only 1 star out of 5 for that BRBO. But in any case, that gives an idea of how remote their initial trek was across the state, the very early conditions of the communities they discovered during their trip, and how just in 2 decades, the canal would transform literally the state of New York and its communities. So just fast forwarding ahead a little bit, summer of 1810, we have the Canal Commissioner's Expedition, the report of the Canal Commission in 1811. This report extols the virtues of an inclined plane. The report is issued and authored primarily by Gouverneur Morris, who has the greatest amount of credibility of all the commissioners. He advocates an inclined plane canal, meaning there would be no locks from Lake Erie down to the Hudson River. The elevation of the canal would just slowly decrease, moving from west to east. All the commissioners and all the people involved in taking the surveys knew that this was not practical, but it also had the benefit of being the cheapest option. So they thought that that's what they would go with first. And fortunately, it didn't get in the way of the canal ultimately being built. We have a little intermission. Every great story needs an intermission. This is otherwise known as the War of 1812. During the War of 1812, there are other things to worry about. And then on December 3rd, 1815, a meeting occurs in New York City. This leads to the publication of the New York Memorial, also a very important document, which is in the care of the New York State Archives. Was burned partially in the Capitol fire, but survives. The memorial itself is published in February of 1816, but the meeting to build public support for the canal's construction takes place in New York City in December of the preceding year on the 3rd or the 30th, depending on which historian you want to believe. And that really galvanizes public support for the construction of the canal. We've done all these surveys. We've done all this work. The federal government is still very interested and in fact passes to fund construction of canals and roads across the country, what is known as the bonus bill, essentially using federal surplus to make these internal improvements. However, as a New Yorker is on his way out of Washington, as he stops to congratulate and thank President Madison for the legislation, which is going to finally lead to the construction of all these canals, including one in New York. President Madison says, "Oh, I'm gonna veto that. That's turned too much pork. It turned into government overreach." And so now we are back to what is New York State going to do? And so I know many of you on this call today are familiar with the speed and efficiency with which New York State government typically operates. Things get done very quickly, very efficiently, always in the light of day. I just want you to look at these two dates at the bottom of the screen. In March of 1817, the state of New York gets the rug pulled out from under them. The federal government, all this work has been designed to show the federal government, you should invest in this project. It will truly be transformative. Federal government takes a pass. And on April 15th, 1817, not 2 months later, the legislature of New York State approves construction of the Erie and Champlain canals. Truly amazing. So as I move my taskbar once again, just bear with me. And Jonas Platt's account of that incident occurs at the Council of Revision, which in New York State, there was an archaic process following the passage of any state legislation, which had an extra layer. Now we get into the government we know and love, right? You've got an extra layer of bureaucracy that you need to get through in order to pass anything. And so at this Council of Revision, DeWitt Clinton's political enemy, then Vice President Daniel Tompkins, stops by and tries to sink the deal by saying, hey, we could go back to war with England again. And that convinced Chancellor Kent to say, well, if we can have war or a canal, I vote for the canal, and the rest is almost history. So the Erie Canal, here you see a scene, DeWitt Clinton on the Seneca Chief, which you'll see again in a minute or two, making the inaugural trip through the canal in 1825. Other than the governor, most of these people are not identified, but in the upper right-hand corner, you see a young man leaning against a buffer beam or a swing beam for a gate. That's actually Tom Ryan. But other than that, we don't know who these people are. But it is amazing to say that New York State so quickly rose to the occasion, knowing, and here's where DeWitt Clinton gets the credit and his contemporaries, they knew and could predict the extraordinary impact that linking not just Albany to Buffalo, but the Great Lakes to Atlantic would have. You are now providing that interior route, and the Erie Canal would literally provide the water that would write the map, draw the map of the United States as we know it today. So it is no small thing to accomplish in such a quick political turnaround to get the support for moving forward. And in fact, when they started constructing the canal, New Yorkers wanted these English and other European canal engineers to come in, design it, oversee construction. It was considered widely to be such folly that they couldn't get anybody. William Weston was one name to come over and do it. So the engineers, Benjamin Wright, homegrown, literally founded the School of American Engineering on the Erie Canal project. When they started construction, they did not know how they would scale the Niagara Escarpment. They just started building, start in Rome, build the easiest part, the first. And as they continued on, they still didn't know where the canal would terminate on the western end. And where the canal would end up on the western end was largely regarded to be the Super Bowl of the time. And at least Buffalo won that one. So Jesse Hawley comes back. Now, he has really maintained a low profile during the planning, the political fight, and the construction of the canal. He was, after all, writing these essays from prison. He used a pen name while he did that, Hercules, but eventually he comes out as the proponent that had written those essays, becomes a very vocal advocate, and goes on to lead a very good life in public service. And he is credited at the completion of the canal. And it is altogether fitting that he finally gets some credit because he was in debtor's prison. He didn't have enough credit. Anyway, so he says at the moment of completion, America can never forget to acknowledge that they have built the longest canal in the world in the least time, with the least experience, for the least money, and the greatest public benefit. And that was certainly true. Erie Canal took 9 years to build, cost $7 million. Tolls paid for the cost of construction within a decade. Was almost immediately dimensionally obsolete. It was so successful that they realized immediately they had built it too small. So it was subsequently enlarged between 1836 and 1862. And that is a reconstruction of the entire canal. The locks are rebuilt. Locations are changed. The route, in many cases, significantly changed. It is still using natural water bodies as feeders for the canal, rather than moving the navigation channel to those natural water bodies, but it's a complete reconstruction of the canal. Tolls are constitutionally abolished in 1882 because of significant competition at that point from the railroad. Canal tonnage peaks, by the way, in about 1871. And a second enlargement is begun in 1895, known as the $9 million improvement. And after a few years, the $9 million gone, nothing very much has been accomplished. So in comes the Rough Rider, Teddy Roosevelt, to become governor, 1898. He's elected. There is a report already underway, largely related to the $9 million improvement. TR says thanks, but no thanks. He commissions his own report. The Barge Canal Act passes 1903 at a cost of $101 million for construction. That did not include the cost of canal terminals, which added, I believe, another $20 million. Construction begins in 1905 and is completed in 1918. And importantly, this move from mules to tugboats also moves the canal out of the ditch, so to speak, in many cases, and moves away from the idea of only using natural water bodies, rivers, lakes, for water supply, but rather uses them also for the navigation channel proper. And in that way, pays tribute to the original 1792 Western Inland Lock Navigation Company improvements. So we come full circle. The Barge Canal is an entirely different canal. Now the canal has been rebuilt twice because that enlarged era Erie Canal, still mule drawn, is a new canal. This is a new canal itself. But the interesting thing, and I think the important thing, and you can say this in some respects, even going back to the Western Inland Lock Navigation Company, some of the improvements related to which were utilized in the early days of the Erie Canal. There's been a constant, continuous, unbroken chain of navigation here. As the canals go from one era to the next, there are, in this case with the barge canal, there are junction locks so that the 1800s era canals can be accessed and still used. So there's an unbroken chain. It's almost as if literally one era canal hands the baton to the next, and it's sort of a seamless transition. But the barge canal is itself a very new waterway. Interestingly, the canal again does not utilize mule-drawn transportation or horse-drawn transportation. Here you can see a fairly recent picture of a full-size tug and barge unit going through the Waterford Flight. It gives you an idea of the scale of what now is possible with a new barge canal built to accommodate 3,000-ton cargo vessels. And when we talk about the generations of vessels that utilize these various canals, we talk about the evolution of a canal boat. And fortunately, we've got three unbelievably accurate, improbable in their existence, instances to look at here. The first of which is the replica vessel Seneca Chief. This is being constructed by the Buffalo Maritime folks in Buffalo, New York. This is a fairly recent picture. This is a recreation of the vessel with which DeWitt Clinton opened the canal in 1825. It's wonderfully done. If you're along the canal in 2025, you'll see this vessel in the fall of the year, recreating that original journey. So very exciting to see that, and they've done a marvelous job. So we really have a time machine here that takes us back to the opening of the canal in 1825, which is amazing. We also have a time machine that takes us back to the enlarged canal era. This is the vessel Lois McClure. Sadly, her namesake, Lois McClure, who was a generous supporter of this effort, just passed away. But this vessel was built by the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum in Burlington, Vermont, based on underwater drawings that were made of a wreck on Lake Champlain. General Butler. Not much was known about sailing canal boats prior to this effort, but we know an awful lot now. And this boat is a wonderfully a wonderfully accurate representation of an 1800s era enlarged canal vessel. Has a certificate of authenticity from the Canals Society of America, and she is now thankfully in the care of the Canal Society of New York State, and still in existence, which is really terrific. And we have the space shuttle. So in 1921, 5 hulls are launched by the McDougall Duluth Shipbuilding Company. These are vessels that are designed to transit the Great Lakes, the Erie Canal, right to the East Coast and along the East Coast. So you don't need to break bulk. You don't have to change your cargo from ship to canal boat and back to ship or another means of transportation after you've gotten through the canal. Again, what the barge canal did was emphasize that the connection is truly between the Great Lakes and the Atlantic, and not necessarily Albany to Buffalo. And what's really neat is at this moment, and of course the Day Peckinpah listed on the National Historic Register, like a very, very small other number of boats still on the canal system today. Check her out while you can, because all 3 of these boats being around and being able to be viewed and appreciated at this moment in time for the Erie Canal Bicentennial is something very, very special. And being at the wheel of the Day Peckinpah, as I can attest, is something very, very special indeed. So the barge canal, sort of by the numbers, after its indifference for the better part of for the better part of a century, federal government finally shows up, says, hey, nice new canal you have there. we'll take that. As you may recall, there was a little bit of a war going on at the time when the canal opens in 1918. The state has a little bit of a problem getting the canal back, but finally wrests control from the feds in 1921. Then you start to see vessels designed and purpose-built for the new canal, like the Day Peckinpah, come onto the scene. Federal government now has sort of got a twinkle in its eye relative to New York State canals. And it continues to invest in the New York State canal system, partially enlarging the canal, deepening it, and raising guard gate and bridge elevations from Waterford to Oswego between 1935 and 1960. Constitutional amendment approved by the voters of New York State authorized the transfer of canals to the federal government in 1959. Spoiler alert, it does not get transferred. Governor Rockefeller comes in and says, I think I'll hang on to it. Thankfully, we all appreciate that. If you've tried to get into the federal lock at Troy uninvited, you can imagine how difficult it would be to have a nice picnic at one of the canal locks today, had that happened. But you have what's interesting now, there's a lot of agitation from the shipping industry to make more improvements to the canal. The thought is that would necessitate federal investment, and that continues in the form of another proposal to completely rebuild the canal by a British inventor and businessman named Nigel Chatty in 1977. Very interesting to read up on that. But people are still kind of waiting for the next barge to come through. And New York State in the late 80s under Governor Mario Cuomo says, is there something else we can be doing with this asset? We've got it. We're not going to lose it. Are we maximizing its potential, especially for recreation? So you have the authorship of the Barge Canal Planning Report, which is published in 1989, written by the aforementioned Mr. Ryan. That leads to both a constitutional amendment to reintroduce tolls and to allow for the leasing of canal land in 1991 to make sure that the canal is self-sustaining. There's another spoiler alert there, but I'll skip it. Canals are transferred to the New York State Thruway in 1992, and the Canal Recreation Way Plan, which sort of is the culmination of all this planning effort over the last half decade, is published in 1995 to really provide a blueprint for how the canal will be managed and utilized and appreciated moving forward. So again, the canal system is not a waterway that was constructed from Albany to Buffalo. That might have been the practical boundary. But as this bulletin board, I took a picture of this driving along the thruway yesterday. I don't know why it looks so old-timey, but it really is Great Lakes to the Atlantic. It is the Midwest to Great Britain. It is Europe to the interior of the United States. And there is no public works in the history of America that had more impact, especially at the state level, than the construction of the Erie Canal for that reason. And going back to our initial question, who done it? Who gets the credit for this amazing waterway? For me, it's this guy. I talked about Jesse Hawley. There were a lot of people who later claimed credit that had the same idea about the same time, said, oh no, I don't think I read those essays. And everybody read the essays, because it is really, if you look at that moment in time, this is when people really start to talk about the impact that the canal, if constructed, could have. They also talk about how crazy it would be to even try it. Connor Watson, another contemporary of all of these folks, said it was like we were trying to build a canal to the moon, and that's not too far from the truth. But the first person to sit down and write it all out, he must have had an excellent library at his disposal when he was in debtor's prison, was Jesse Hawley. And for that, we're very, very grateful. If I didn't make it up, or if I didn't hear about it from Tom Grasso, Craig Williams, Duncan Hay, Bill Schollenberger, Tom Ryan, I probably read about it here someplace. Some excellent reading if you want to dive a little more into the history of New York State and the various generations of the canal. You can also access the history of the New York State Canal System by Noble Whitford, who worked for the New York State Surveyor. That is a great resource online at eriecanal.org. Also, DeWitt and Clinton's private journal, where you can read all his other Reddit reviews of his VRBOs, and the Canal Recreation Way Plan at Canal Corp's website. And with that, in just a moment, I am going to manage to stop sharing my screen and listen to what Jean has to say. Thanks a whole lot.
John, thank you very much. Thank you. And I love this transition, because we're going to go from getting to the canal and the barge canal we have today to the canal that we can take advantage of. And what better person to articulate that than Jean Mackay. So Jean, I'll stop talking again and turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Tom, and thank you, John. That was great. Deep dive into the history and the humor that you bring to it is much appreciated. So I'm going to share my screen now, and we're going to look at a lot more contemporary images of the canal today. All right, great. So thank you all for being here, and I'm excited to have you on board as we kick off the bicentennial year. What I want to do in the next 20 minutes or so is introduce you to the canal corridor today and share some of the best ways that you can experience all the canal has to offer, and then tell you about some of the exceptional things that are happening for the bicentennial in 2025. So as Tom said in the beginning, one of the things that makes the canal so exceptional is that it's still here. And you can still visit the canal. You can take a boat from Buffalo to Albany. You can ride your bike alongside the canal for that entire distance on the Canalway Trail. You can go to many events and happenings along the water and visit canal communities that have been welcoming travelers for more than 200 years. This is Lockport. And as John mentioned, you know, the canal has been changed and modified over the years, from the early 1825 to the enlargement to today. And there are a number of places where you can go, including Lockport, to see both iterations. And so you see the Lockport Flight of 5 on the right and the current locks of the barge canal today. The U.S. Congress designated the Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor in 2000. And a heritage area, or a heritage corridor, is a place where there's exceptional scenery and history, culture, and nature coming together to kind of make a really unique place, and a place that's worth protecting, a place that's worth investing in. But unlike a Yosemite National Park or a Grand Canyon, where you have maybe a couple of entry points and you come into the park and you say, oh, okay, I'm here at Yosemite. And the National Park Service operates and manages the park. In this case, there are many points of entry and exit in the National Heritage Corridor. The canal itself is managed and operated by the New York State Canal Corporation, and they're under the New York Power Authority. So the Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor's role is to catalyze and support state and local efforts to preserve and celebrate our canal heritage. You can see that the spine of the National Heritage Corridor, the boundaries in green, the spine is the canal itself. It includes both the active canal today and the historic alignments, the communities that grew up along the canal, upstate's major cities of Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Albany are all within the National Heritage Corridor. And the canal system also carries the very prestigious designation of being a National Historic Landmark. The canal today, it's so much more than a waterway. It's more than just a transportation corridor. It's a living link to our past. It's a vibrant and integral part of canal communities it's a vital part of New York's future. And I hope that you'll take the opportunity in 2025 to visit places along the canal, perhaps that you have not been to before. It's a big state. There's so many communities and places that are worth exploring. And the canal's engineering marvels, sites, events, and communities really make for a very unique travel experience. There's a lot of regional variation along the canal, so I just wanted to point out some of that because some of you may be on this webinar from the West, from the East, from Central New York, and you may have visited some of the canal, but perhaps not seen some of the regional differences. In Western New York is where, when the canal was enlarged, it stayed in its original bed, was just kind of made bigger. And so you're still traveling through these small canal towns and villages. You're traveling through a lot of rural agricultural land. It's fairly flat. And so if you're going by bike, that's a great thing to know because there's not a lot of hills. The water is, calm and pleasant, and it's a lovely way to see the canal kind of still as the front door to many of these communities. In Central New York is where the current canal and the old Erie Canal really diverge. And yet many of the communities along the original route still have canal artifacts that you can go and see from the enlarged canal in particular. And and yet there's also a very active boating community along the canal that's active today. So you get kind of both, the best of both worlds in Central New York. The Old Erie Canal State Historic Park runs from just east of Syracuse all the way to Rome. And so that's a really nice path to travel with some really interesting historic sites along the way. And then in Eastern New York this is where really the canal was moved into the Mohawk River. So the current Erie Canal is in the Mohawk. The historic Erie Canal was largely paved over, and yet there are sites that you can see the historic remnants of the canals. Schoharie Crossing State Historic Site is one of them, and there are still canal communities along the way. It's just that they are also kind of river towns also. So those are some very interesting places to go on the eastern end as well. So as you are thinking about where to go, there's a lot of decisions to make. One is sort of, where do you go? How do you want to travel? Do you want to go by boat, by bike, by car, walk? You can go any of those ways. You may think about how much time do you have to spend. You can certainly go and visit the canal for a couple of hours, but you can easily do a weekend getaway or a full vacation. And there are excellent resources available to help you plan a trip. And I'll share some websites for you to visit and check out. But there are itineraries that you can follow right off the shelf for a couple of days. There are day trips and half-day trips for paddling and cycling. And there's excellent guidebooks to help you find your way amidst this 500-mile long corridor. So one of the things that people really love to do is get on the water, and I'd encourage you to do that because that's the way you really kind of get a strong feel for the canal itself. The good news is there are boat tours that you can take within an hour's drive of every major upstate city. So you can do a sunset cruise or an afternoon cruise, a guided tour. There's all kinds of themed cruises and educational tours. You can also rent a canal boat for a week's vacation. You'll get a lesson in steering and driving a boat, and then you're on your way, and you have to pray that you do okay in the locks. But so far, nobody has had too many problems. So I encourage you to check that out. It's a really, again, a really fun way, and often what people say is the fastest way to slow down and really see a lot of New York State. If you have your own boat, there's more than 80 public boat ramps that you can put in and explore the canal on your own. The canal has also become a paddling destination. We've worked very hard to create a water trail. It's well signed. There are numerous places to put in a kayak or a canoe, and numerous places now that you can rent a kayak or canoe on the water. And there are a lot of paddling events, and that's often a great way to just get started. If you are not inclined to get on the water, I would encourage you to go to one of the canal harbors and visitor centers and just watch the boats go by. Talk to people who are traveling the system. There's often you'll see boaters from all over the world, from Canada, people coming through. So it's a really interesting experience if you have not done that. Cycling is another fantastic way to really experience the Canalway Corridor. The 365-mile Erie Canalway Trail goes right alongside the canal. In many places it's off-road, so it's really a great, safe bike route for families, for kids. And it's suitable for anyone, of kind of all abilities. It makes for great day trips and also for adventurous multi-day journeys. And so we have people now coming from around the country and around the world to experience the trail and see the canal this way. As you're going, there's so many interesting places to stop along the way. And I think that's, again, what makes the Canalway Corridor so fantastic as a destination, is that there's a lot of small town charm, there's big cities, there's historic sites and museums, interesting nature preserves. This year, certainly a lot of the historic sites and museums along the canal will have special programs and exhibits for the bicentennial. So that will be, so there's just a lot to take advantage of. And then there's a full slate of festivals and events along the canal every year. And this year we have some really wonderful big celebrations and big journeys. So I want to tell you about those things now, but also encourage you to check out our events calendar. And again, I'll share that link in a minute, but there are lots and lots of events taking place all along the canal. The first big day is opening day of the canal season. That'll be May 16th this year, 7 o'clock. The locks open. And if you have never been to Waterford for the opening day, and you can get there, get up early and come down to the canal in Waterford. And John and I will be there along with boaters from all over the place, looking to get through the canal. And this is an opening day photo from this past year, going through the locks of the Waterford flight. But there's just a lot of enthusiasm and excitement. Waterford is having a canal festival on the opening weekend. So there'll be lots of activities and festivities going on that day in particular. The Albany Symphony Orchestra is having a Water Music New York concert series. They're doing that in early July. They haven't announced the locations yet, but that'll be a really wonderful way to enjoy music along the canal. And they'll be doing some special compositions and educational programming along with that. The Cycle of the Erie Canal Bicentennial Tour is another great event that takes place in July, mid-July. It's an 8-day, 400-mile cycling tour from Buffalo to Albany. The great thing is you don't have to carry your sleeping bag or your gear. You put it in a truck and it's at your destination each night. So if you're interested in that, it's hosted by Parks and Trails New York, and the website is there. I plan to be on that tour again this year. John, I don't know if you're going to be joining us, but food for thought for you. But the idea of doing an 8-day bike ride sounds like a lot to you, and it is a lot. You might check out the Canalway Challenge. This is a program that we offer where you can walk, run, cycle, or paddle. You choose your own mileage goal, and you can pick as low as 1 mile if you're just really getting started, or if you have a mobility challenge, 15, 90, 180, 360, the whole thing, or you can do our special bicentennial challenge and do 200 miles in 2025. The good thing is you have all the way till the end of October to achieve your challenge and earn your rewards. So check out that program if you are interested. Another really exciting happening for the bicentennial is the World Canals Conference. And this is coming to Buffalo in September. And this is a gathering of global canal innovators, canal managers, and just canal enthusiasts. So you don't have to work along a canal or be an expert to come. You may become one after you come to the conference, but we're really excited for this gathering. It's a typical conference with presentations, and there'll be field tours. So you won't just be, in lectures. You'll be visiting different canal sites, hearing what's happening along the Erie Canal today. There's pre and post conference tours that are available, and if you are interested, there's great opportunities to be an exhibitor or a conference sponsor. So I encourage you to check that out. We're hosting it along with the New York State Canal Corporation, Visit Buffalo Niagara, and the Erie Canal Harbor Development Corporation. As part of the conference, but I want to mention this because you don't have to go to the conference to take advantage of this, we're offering an America's Gateway tour, and it's happening the week before the conference. And the tour will go from New York City to Buffalo and explore the extraordinary impact of the Erie Canal in New York State. So you will really be following in the footsteps of waves of immigrants who came to New York Harbor, will go to Ellis Island, will come up the Hudson River, and then turn left at Albany and head out along the canal. You'll have the opportunity to visit some of the prime canal sites, take a boat tour, and also look at some of the social movements that the canal sparked along the way. And you can find information about that on the World Canals Conference website. John talked about the Seneca Chief, which is the recreated canal boat that DeWitt Clinton took along the canal. The Buffalo Maritime Center is leading this major journey across the canal this year, and they'll be leaving during the World Canals Conference. So participants of the conference will be part of the kickoff celebrations in Buffalo. And then they're going to be stopping in numerous communities along the way, and there'll be celebrations and events to take advantage of. So this is their route map. You can also find this online. And when the boat arrives in New York City, there's planning underway for a major public event in New York City on October 26th this year. So we really look forward to that. I want to just turn, briefly to looking at the next century along the canal, because the bicentennial, it's a great opportunity to look back and to commemorate all that the canal did for New York, the good and the bad, to really do a deep dive into that history and what it's meant. But it's also an extraordinary opportunity to look forward and to say, what do we want the next 100 years to look like? The canal today is very much a multidimensional waterway. So it's not only important just for tourism and recreation, but there's power generation happening along the canal. Canal is an important source of water for agriculture, for industry, for some communities. There is commercial shipping still happening along the canal, certainly not a lot, but very important shipping in terms of some big infrastructure things that can only go this way. So it is very important to continue to maintain that. This is a bridge that traveled to Buffalo along the canal, a pedestrian bridge that's at a park in Buffalo. So that's what this photo is. The canal is just really important for healthy communities, for healthy waterways, for wildlife. And so we're really, as we look at the next century, we're looking at how can we maintain this kind of integrated system of economic, cultural, natural, sort of ecological and, public benefits. The canal is a public waterway with a great number of public benefits, and we want to make sure that we maximize those. John mentioned the Recreation Way plan that was written in 1995. And that plan really helped to transform the waterway from a largely commercial waterway to a recreational one. And this plan is being updated now. It will be released this spring. So this is now a Canal Recreation Way Plan 2050. And the Recreation Way Commission has been meeting, doing public meetings, and they're looking at the next 25 years of really kind of creating this vibrant through line of canals, parks, trails that benefits communities and people in New York State and beyond. So we're excited about that. And certainly the Erie Canal National Heritage Corridor is looking at, you know, kind of how can we play a catalyzing role in ensuring the canal's vitality today and for the future. So we're investing in communities, in events, in infrastructure projects. We're looking at ways to make the canal more accessible to people with special needs. And so we're excited about all of the, you know, the direction of where the canal is headed in the next, certainly 25, and I hope 100 years. As I close here, I want to share with you a celebratory video that looks at some of the exciting things going on in the coming year. All right, thank you. You know, what I love about that video is how many people care about the canal. And it almost chokes me up when I see it because, you know, we would not have the canal we do today if there weren't these incredible groups of volunteers who said, this canal is important. Our heritage is important. We need to excavate these locks, save these places that really are our history. And then also people who are saying, we need to get involved now, today, to care about the canal now. We need to be out and on the trail and on the water and picking up trash and greeting people. And so we just have so many people that really care about the canal. And I want to encourage those of you who are on the call, on the webinar today, to think about how you might get involved. There are historic sites all along the corridor, and many of them have aging volunteers. And we need to renew those people who say, this is important to us. We need to be involved because this stuff just doesn't happen. So I encourage you to look for ways that you might get involved. One thing you could do is sign up for the Erie Canal newsletter. Our website is right there, and that way you'll get a monthly update about like things that are happening, not just events, but grants that are available and other activities. And then I also really encourage you, and I hope I've inspired you to come and explore and enjoy the waterway. This is the year to do it, but that's also the way for you to really connect, to discover your own part of the history and and just enjoy how much the canal shapes this, the state and how much is here for you. If you are a boater, I also encourage you to look at the New York State Canal Corporation website, and they've got a full, robust calendar of activities also. So there's just a lot going on. You'll find a calendar of events on our website, and pretty much anything you would want for planning your trip, you can find right off the homepage. So I encourage you to come and explore, and we'll be excited to answer any questions that you have as we go into the home stretch of today's presentation.
Jean, thank you. One of the things you said really struck me. Everyone in upstate New York is an hour's drive from the canal. If you haven't been to some canal site, and they're all over the place, as John pointed out, every one of those locks is a great picnic ground. In addition, great entertainment. We stop by the lock just east of Amsterdam all the time. We get our ice cream cone at Stewart's and watch folks lock through, or going out to Palmyra, which is the site of a lot of history that impacts the state of Utah. If you think about that one a little bit, it's incredible. I want to just point out a couple of shameless plugs, and John alluded to it. If you're interested in learning more about the canal, read some of those books, and the records that those authors used to document what happened are preserved at the State Archives. If you go to our website, look at our now somewhat dated but very useful finding aid, The Mighty Chain is a good description of some, not all, of the great records that we have here in the State Archives that are available for research for anyone. Craig Williams has an article in our most recent issue of New York Archives magazine about the people that built the canal back from 1816 to 1825, the individual workers and the records that we have of their individual pay slips that are preserved in the State Archives, in addition to all the great maps and plans, the Schillner maps, which are an incredible resource. And those resources are being used by folks who love the canal. Here in Albany, there's a group, the Albany Waterway Project, that's using a lot of those records to uncover the Albany Basin. Next month, or not next month, but in our next issue of the Archives magazine, we'll have a great article about the General Butler, which again was the prototype of the Lois McClure, and the sinking of the General Butler, and how that helps us, again, as John pointed out, connect to the boats that navigated this artificial river, and again, helped make our state and our country and our world a little more tightly connected. There's a lot of questions piling up in the Q&A, so the longer I talk, the less time we have for answers, so I will shut up.
Yes, a lot of questions today. It was a great presentation, and people are really excited about the Erie Canal and about this important anniversary. And I think we'll start. We're not going to be able to get to every question, but there are a few questions about kind of the construction of the canal. Do we know anything about the workforce? Do we know anything about scientific innovations in construction methods that made the project possible?
Yeah, we'll just extend the session here another 5 hours, and I think we should be able to get through that. But so much, as Tom said, refer folks to the records in the State Archives, some of those books. The canal, and it was even in the original construction of the canal, started with, I mean, if you had a farm, you were building a section by your farm. The locals in New York State, people that had already settled here, became the first contractors. People that had some math or surveying experience became the engineers. And it was really a homegrown effort. In the later years, especially the western end, getting over that Niagara escarpment, the Lockport Flight of Five, you start to see more immigrant labor come in the original Erie Canal construction. But it was very much a homegrown effort. And technology, yes, I mean, Canvas White, one of the people who claims to have invented the hydraulic cement. There's a little bit of a debate there. There's a great story there, again, if we had more time. but necessity is the mother of all invention. And from stump pullers to hydraulic cement to new construction techniques, it was a great breeding ground for technology that would be employed in canal construction throughout America and throughout the world. Remember, the Erie Canal was not the first canal not in America. So not even the oldest operating canal in America today. Dismal Swamp Canal gets that distinction, but it was certainly the most audacious and, from an engineering perspective, really complex and almost impossible. Elkanah Watson was not far off when he said it was like we were trying to build a canal to the moon. So it drove a lot of invention that would be applied in subsequent eras of the canal, certainly, and in different areas throughout America.
Great. Jean, there are a lot of questions that are kind of about, how do we get specific information about this event or that event? And I do think what we should do, because both of you, Jean and John, shared some websites and resources on your PowerPoints. So I think we'll collate some of those and send them out in an email to people who have registered, so you'll have access to those links. But Jean, where should a person start if they're interested, in specific events? This
Okay. I would encourage you to go to eriecanalway.org, and right on the homepage, there is a photo, and it says Find Festivals and Events. And it will take you to the events calendar for everything that's going on this year that we know about so far. And it'll be an expanding list in the coming months. The information, there's kind of highlighted events there. So the Seneca Chief information, the Royal Canals Conference information is there. Some of the major things that I mentioned are there. We also have a bicentennial page on the website, and so we've highlighted some of the major things that are happening there. So that's just kind of a good gateway for linking off to some of the other sites that I mentioned. You can also visit the Buffalo Maritime Center website for information about the Seneca Chief and the latest updates on that tour.
Great. So that maybe doesn't answer every single specific question, but it's a good place to start. And again, we'll get those links to everybody who registered today. And there were a couple of questions about people whose ancestors maybe worked on building the canal, people whose ancestors maybe owned property along the canal before it was built. And Tom, what do you suggest if people are interested in learning more about that history? What records might they? Oh, you're muted.
That's probably the best way for me to answer a question. No, I would start, rather than looking at the records, because the records are voluminous, and I would start with looking at some of the books. My favorite review of the construction of the canal is Carol Sheriff's book about the artificial river, which is very good. But from there, I think it inspires people to get better questions. And I think I see one of the questions that we've already talked about is who built the canal. That article by Craig Williams that's in the New York Archives magazine is a sort of a taste of the kinds of details of who did build the canal. John alluded to it. He said it was the farmers that were all along the canal route. It was a great way to make some money and do some labor, and you could do it at your own pace and do it at your own schedule. So I wouldn't necessarily send you right to the records. I would send you to the books first.
Great. So I think we'll wrap it up, but we'll make sure to get those resources to you. And this webinar, like all of our online speaker series, is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel, so you can always come back to it. And I just give my own shameless plug that New York Archives magazine is celebrating the bicentennial this year with a slew of articles about the Erie Canal. And so if you have not subscribed to New York Archives, now is the time to do it if you're interested in the Erie Canal. And you can do that on our website at nysarchivestrust.org. And thank you so much, Jean and John and Tom, for joining us today and for sharing your vast knowledge on this really fascinating and important topic. And thank you to everybody who joined us. If you're interested in learning more about the New York State Archives, that website is archives.nysed.gov. And if you're interested in learning more about the events and activities of the Archives Partnership Trust, that website is nysarchivestrust.org. It's our privilege to make these events available to you and to keep New York State's history alive. If you have any comments about or ideas, suggestions for future programming, please don't hesitate to send us an email at aptrust@nysed.gov. And don't forget to join us next Tuesday, February 4th, for our next online speaker series at 12:30. And that online speaker series is called The Black Woods, a Scheme of Justice and Benevolence on the Adirondack Frontier. You can find out more about that program and register for it for free on our website, nysarchivestrust.org.